So I'm going to be speaking today, and I like to run these, as those of you who were at either of my previous sessions, I like to run these fairly relaxed, fairly informally. So if you have questions, just, let's work through them as we go through the slides. So you can interrupt me. Thank you very much. It's not a problem. So I'm going to be speaking today, or right now, on shrinking administrative budgets and the staff FTE multiplier effect. I had to come up with what I thought was a catchy title. So that was as catchy as I could come up with. I don't know if it's good or not good. Maybe you'll tell me at the end of the session. What am I going to be speaking on today? One of my pet peeves when I was in the independent school business was whenever there was financial constraints, whenever budgets needed to be tightened, the immediate focus always went to how do we tighten up admin? We're spending too much money on admin. It was never, how do we tighten up on teacher salaries? That never seems to get discussed. I'm sure your school is no different than any of the schools that I've either been involved with as an executive director or that we have currently as clients. But pretty much every independent school I know of spends about 80 to 90% of their entire budget on staff compensation, salaries, benefits, etc. The remaining is on facilities, 10% on facilities, and maybe 10% on everything else. I don't know if your schools are the same or different.
Much lower.
No? Much lower? Okay.
Keep it tight.
Well, if you keep a tight rein, that's good, because most of the schools I'm aware of don't. And that's where this is coming from. How to, when you get the call as someone who's heading up the business side of operations, we need to tighten up, how do you do it? Because you can't just say, well, let's get rid of some teachers, because no one wants to hear that. Principals don't want to hear it, boards don't want to hear it, parents certainly don't want to hear it. So that's kind of where I'm going to be going today. The multiplier effect, for those of you who have had some exposure to finance or banking, will probably recognize it as being a tool that central banks use to increase the money supply in an economy and boost an economy. What is it? I found this cartoon that I put up here. Hey Frank, look at this, money multiplies as it's spent again and again, moving from person to person. Big deal, I spend my paycheck several times over all of myself, and that's before I even get it. The point being that as a person gets their paycheck, or as they earn money, they save some of it, they spend some of it. And that then gets earned as income by someone else, and who then spends and saves, and so on down the line. So the net result is that as money gets spent in an economy, it's not a one-to-one relationship, but money, the power, the purchasing power, or the supply of money in an economy increases. So the multiplier effect is an effect in economics in which an increase in spending produces an increase in national income and consumption greater than the initial amount spent. For example, if a corporation builds a factory, it will employ construction workers and their suppliers, as well as those who work in the factory. Indirectly, the new factory will stimulate employment in laundries, restaurants, and service industries in the factory's vicinity. Makes sense. A company spends $100 billion, builds a new factory, they're going to employ people. We see it all the time. And that causes industries to spring up along the side. I mean, one of the classic examples of that is the subway system I don't know if any of you have ever visited Washington, D.C. in the States, but they have an amazing subway system. The federal government, the U.S. federal government, spent $500 million building that system. It serves not just the District of Columbia, but it serves Maryland, Virginia. It goes into a lot of the outlying areas. Well, what they found, what they knew would happen, but what they found is that as a new extension to the subway line got built through, for lack of a better word, some pretty gross neighborhoods, that spurred development, that spurred spending, that spurred reinvestment. The neighborhoods became revitalized. Young professionals started moving in, having families. So it has a whole spin-off effect. So that $500 million investment multiplies and circulates around the economy. There's a concept called marginal propensity to consume, and that's defined as an empirical metric that quantifies induced consumption, the concept, the increase in personal consumer spending that occurs with an increase in disposable income. You earn more money, you can spend more. That occurs, marginal propensity to consume is measured as the ratio of the change in consumption to the change in income, so it's always going to be a percentage figure or a decimal figure somewhere between 0 and 1. So where all this is going, hope nobody's eyes glaze over, but I come from a math background, so I had to put it in mathematical symbols. Basically, the classic example in banking is our own banking system here in Canada. Our banking system is what's called a reserve banking system, where the central bank, the government, basically says for every dollar that gets deposited at a bank, the bank has to hold on to a certain percentage of that money as a reserve. The remainder, they can do with what they want. They can loan out again, etc. So if you deposit $100 into your neighborhood bank, let's say there's a 10% reserve requirement, which means for every dollar the bank has to hold that they receive, they have to maintain in their vault somewhere 10 cents. So you deposit $100, they have to maintain $10 of that. They can loan out the other $90. So then another person comes by, they loan out $90, that person then takes that 90, deposits it in their bank, that bank has to hold on to 10% or $9, means that bank can then loan out $81, and so on down the line. Those additional amounts that get loaned out, the mathematical way of representing that is what's called a geometrical sum, and that's what that 1 over 1 minus MPC is. So if you think about that MPC as being that 10% reserve requirement, so 1 over 1 minus 0.1, 1 minus 0.1 is 0.9, so 1 over 0.9, inverse of 0.9, is the multiplier effect of what that initial $100 is, the impact of that initial $100 in the economy. So, why am I going there? And sorry, this is just putting in words what I just said. This is the classic example that everyone talks about, loans and re-loans, and that creates an increase in an economy's money supply. And that's how governments create wealth, spur economies by doing that. So you can think of the banking system as the government's way of building our economy. So, why am I talking about this? Well, as what I think is going on out there in schools is actually going on, current state, primary costs of education are always going up. Teacher compensation and benefits are always on the rise. Your facility costs are always on the rise. Electrical, gas, you name it, nothing ever goes down. All that puts additional upward pressure on tuition fees or your fundraising programs. Something has to give. So that also then puts pressure on expense minimization. How do you deliver the same quality product or increase the quality of the product that you're delivering with all these added pressures? So normally what happens in cases like this, boards generally look at the admin side of the business because it's the indirect, it's not direct service provision, it's not teachers, it's not classroom focus. That's where the focus usually goes. And that puts pressure on admin staff to always be able to do more with less resources. less tools, fewer staff. Instead of having a cleaning crew, 3 shifts, down to 2 shifts, down to 1 shift, whatever it might be. But there's always that pressure to make do. Not just make do, but keep getting better with fewer resources. So how do you do that? And this is, of course, building on the previous 2 sessions that I gave. Well, there are certain budgetary tools that you can use. You could get rid of staff. And dare I say, out in the private sector, which is why I, many years ago, decided the private sector was not where I wanted to be, because I didn't particularly care for their approach to doing things. Out in the private sector, you know, if their earnings per share, say it's a publicly traded company, and by the way, I started my career with Xerox Canada, so I know very well what the pressures are, certainly for publicly traded companies. Earnings per share is down this quarter, or stock price is, boy, Xerox's stock price is in a tank. Or the stock price is down by a few cents, so the word comes out of corporate, we need to reduce our expenses. How do you reduce? You get rid of staff. That's the knee-jerk reaction. Another way of doing it is to realign staff responsibilities. Maybe you currently have staff doing things that some piece of technology may be able to do better or more effectively. So you get those same staff people to put their time onto more value-added things and leave the drudgery to a computer program or an auto attendant. I remember when I first joined Xerox, they still had something, a position called a secretary. That's gone by the wayside long ago. And there would be a person there who would answer the phone, or who would type up letters, or type memos, and you don't see that anymore. We have computer systems, everyone does their own memos, you have voicemail, email, you don't have secretaries anymore. Use of temporary or contract staff. There are plenty of schools who don't have their own in-house accounting function. They have a contract company to come in and provide bookkeeping services, or even more, to provide financial oversight services. Using a combination of the above, you could realign staff responsibilities, make use of temporary or contract staff enough to free up a full-time position or 2 full-time positions, and therefore reduce your head count. There's also, I put this one last because it's usually the one that bears the least fruit: indirect administrative staff, ancillary cost reduction, excuse me. That could mean fewer training opportunities. That could mean changing your group health insurance provider. So you, instead of spending, you know, $4,000 a year for group health insurance for each of your 20 staff, you're only spending $3,500 per year. So you save a few bucks there. You know, if you're talking about saving $20,000 or $30,000, that may be the only thing you have to do. If you're looking at saving $100,000 or $200,000, that probably won't get it for you by itself. So there's some budgetary tools. By the way, I don't know